Ruth Kaplan. I'm the chair of this committee. I'm going to ask the other members of the committee to just introduce themselves and to say what other board or commission they may be part of if they are. Carla?
Carla Benka, and I'm a representative from the town's advisory committee.
I'm Harry Friedman.
I'm Joanna Baker. I was appointed as the alternate, and one of our members is unable to be here due to illness, so I will be voting tonight.
I'm Dan Lyons, a member of the Park and Recreation Commission.
I'm David Perlman. I'm a member of the school committee.
I'm Malcolm Coughlin. I'm a member of the Diversity, Inclusion, Community Relations Commission, as well as an employee of Brookline Public Schools.
Okay. Next to me, to my left, is Justin Casanova Davis, who's the Assistant Town Administrator. And I just want to thank him right now for his service to this committee because everything behind the scenes takes a lot of work, as you can imagine. So we do have an agenda for this evening, and we're going to be approving our minutes from prior meetings, and then of course we're going to be having a public hearing on 3 warrant articles tonight. We're going to have, the committee itself is going to have a discussion and deliberation about those articles, and we are going to take votes on each of the articles tonight. And I want to just take a few minutes before we get started with the public hearing to just give you a little bit of background about what the role of the naming committee is, what it is and what it isn't, so it's clear to everybody. And I know there have been a lot of steps in this process town-wide that maybe it would be good to explain to people because it is a little complex at times. Just so you know, there are a few of us who are new to this committee, myself being one of them. Joanna is new, and Malcolm, and Dan, half of us are new. So we were recently appointed in the summer, most of us. And we've met as a new committee one time a few weeks ago, really to establish procedural guidelines for tonight's meeting and hearing. And we'll be voting on to approve the minutes for that meeting shortly. But what I wanted to explain to you in a little bit more detail is really what our jurisdiction is and what our role is tonight. We are not the final decision makers about the name for this school. We are, our charge is to make a recommendation to town meeting. And town meeting, which meets this year on November 19th, and will run for 2 or 3 nights usually. Could even be 4. And again, it starts on November 19th. The actual debate and vote on the new name for the Coolidge Corner School will take place at town meeting. This is an important hearing tonight because we want to hear from all of you. And the reason we have a naming committee in town is to make a recommendation to town meeting and to other decision makers. So I think that what we recommend does carry weight, but we are not the final decision makers. So I just want to make that clear. A couple of other things. I know some of you may have attended a recent hearing that was held by the school subcommittee of the advisory committee. And for those of you who were there, I was there too as a spectator, so thank you for participating in that. As some of you know who were there, but maybe not everyone in this room knows, our advisory committee, which also advises town meeting on warrant articles, came to the conclusion at the end of their subcommittee meeting that they felt that they actually did not really have the requisite expertise or jurisdiction to make a recommendation. So I know that might have been confusing to some of the people who were there that night. That's not going to happen tonight. That's not to say they were in the wrong in what they decided, but they're going to, they're going to report to town meeting that they felt that it was really the role of the naming committee to make this recommendation. One other thing I just wanted to make clear to you all. I used to serve on the school committee, so I know how this can appear to the public. A lot of you in this room tonight, maybe not all of you, are going to be speaking in public comment. And we decided at our last meeting to allot a maximum of 3 minutes to each person. You can see there are a lot of people in the room. And I think at some point I'm going to go to bed tonight. But, so you'll each have 3 minutes. What I just want you to understand is that this is really a public meeting tonight, and it was up to our committee to decide whether we would have a hearing as well to hear from the public. It's within our discretion to do it. We felt it was really important to do that, and we're doing that. But when you speak, and I know a lot of you are very passionate and care deeply about this topic, as do we, we are not going to comment. We're not going to ask you questions. We're not going to comment on what you have to say. It's not because we're not taking it in or we don't care about what you're saying. It's just that that's how public comment works. And when we have our own discussion later, which you're of course privy to stay for, and I'm sure many of you will, many of the things that you had to say might come up in conversation, or it's been taken in by all of us. So I just don't want you to think that because we're not commenting on your comment that we just are not engaged in what you're saying, because we are. But we're not going to ask you questions, and we're not answering questions at that point either. And let me see if there's anything else I wanted to explain. Okay. So the other, procedurally, the other important thing that we decided at our last meeting was that there are 3 warrant articles that are the subject of tonight's meeting and hearing. The petitioners for each of those warrant articles received notice from the town and from us that they each have 10 minutes to present their warrant article. Their arguments. They don't have to take 10 minutes, but they can't have more than 10 minutes. That's a half an hour of time. And the other thing I just want to say is we are respectful of the fact that there are young children here tonight, and we want to allow the children who may want to speak in public comment to have priority, so they don't have to stay here all night and they can go home and do their homework. So that's how that's going to go. Just one other thing I want to say. I was going to give you a little bit more background about how we got here tonight in terms of the whole process for the naming, but I think that's going to be gone over by some people from the school committee, so I'm going to not take up time to do that. The other thing I want to say, just in the interest of getting a lot of public input for tonight, we decided at our last meeting to open up a email that we notified the community about to receive public comment through email. So we have received, I'd say, at least 20, if not somewhere between 20 and 25 comments from people. So we're taking that into consideration too. There are people who aren't here tonight but have written to all of us. And so I hope that you can see from the steps that we're taking that we take this very seriously. We really want to be fair to everybody and hear what everyone has to say. So without further ado, one final thing. If after tonight's meeting and hearing you still have any questions about the process, I will stay afterwards and answer any questions anyone has if something still isn't clear. Okay, so, we're gonna begin, as I said, by just approving the minutes of our last 2 meetings. Again, there were 2 prior meetings to this one. The first one took place on April 4th, 2018, before half of us were on this committee. So I'm going to ask for an approval of those minutes, and I assume that anyone who wasn't a member of that time is going to abstain. So can I have a vote, a motion to approve the minutes of April 4th, 2018?
So moved.
Second? Okay, so all those in favor of those minutes? Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? Got that, Justin? Okay. The second set of minutes, which I think you all received, was for the meeting of September 11th. All those in favor? Oh, someone make a motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Anybody opposed? Abstain? Okay. And we're about to get started on hearing from the public. One more thing I do want to say about tonight. We know that this is a very emotional issue for many people, actually for most people, which is a good thing because you really care. We all really care deeply. I just really want to urge everybody in this room to be respectful of other people speaking, other people's points of views. Please avoid personal attacks of any kind. That's not acceptable. We obviously are open to strong sentiments, but if I feel like anybody's crossing that line, I'm going to just cut you off because I think that we're in a community where modeling civility and respect for one another is really, really critical. And if we can't do it here in Brookline, I don't know where it can be done. And I could go on and on about this issue on a national level, but I won't. But I think you all understand the importance of respecting one another's views and assuming the good intentions of everybody who's here tonight and everyone who has views that may be diametrically opposed to yours, but I urge you to try to understand where they're coming from. And I think we'll learn a lot tonight by listening to each other. And we are probably going to walk out here tonight, and some people are going to be disappointed. Some people will be disappointed. Some people will be very happy. And I think it's really important for everyone to understand that whether you're very happy or very disappointed, that this was a fair process, and you're being heard, and we are all trying to listen to one another and understand each other, because frankly, at the end of the day, when a name is selected for the school, it's really important that all of us, those of us who feel really good about the choice and those of us who don't feel so good about the choice, that we find a way of really coming together and getting beyond any divisions that this process may be creating, because frankly, that's part of our challenge as a community. And I think it's as important as what the ultimate name is, frankly, that we come together as a community and model that behavior for the children of this community. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to start with the petitioners for warrant article number 26. This is the article that where the co-petitioners are, it's the school committee and Deborah Brown, and you guys have 10 minutes. Thank you all.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I think everybody here knows that warrant article 26 involves the name Florida or Florida Ruffin Ridley. But before I get into my presentation, what I'd like to do is to ask the believers of change that are here tonight to stand up, because I personally want to thank them, and I'm sure there are other people that want to thank them for their diligent and courageous work. So thank you. Thank you very much. So who is Florida Ruffin? Well, I found out that the young people know who Florida Rough and Ridley is by just walking up and asking very young people. Whether I was just walking in front of the school or I was at the farmer's market, I would say, so do you know who Florida, where did you go to school and do you know who Florida Rough and Ridley is? And then they would proceed to not only tell me that they knew who Florida Rough and Ridley was, but then they would also proceed to tell me what the process was like, who they voted for, and whether they were liked the outcome or didn't like the outcome. But they were engaged. And the last person I talked to was a 6-year-old. And she was like, we had to vote in our class. And we went. I was like, okay. So the young people took it in. They took in the history. But for us, most of us hadn't heard of Florida Rough and Ridley until maybe 6 months ago. And, that's a function of how history works. We could say the same thing about a lot of women who've made substantial contributions to our society that go unnamed. But what makes Florida Rough and Ridley so special? Well, she was one of those folks that helped organize the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And that is probably the preeminent civil rights organization in this country. She and her family were the first African Americans to buy a home in Brookline. They were the first. In fact, her kids went to the Lawrence School and then the high school. And her son, Ulysses, was a valedictorian. So I just want to make clear that the roots are deep. And if you follow religion, you would know that the Second Unitarian Church in Brookline she was a co-founder. And if you do any research in the UU world, you can type in Florida Rough and Ridley and you'll get to her name. Second UU Church is now Temple Sinai. She helped publish and edited a newspaper called Women's Era. And that was the first, I'm watching my time, that was the first African-American publication for African-American women. And what I'll tell you, one of the things that's really interesting about this publication is that it served as a vehicle for disseminating information about lynchings that were taking place across the country. And it's like the more you read, I kind of get an understanding how this little newspaper helped spread the word across the United States about what was actually going on, primarily in the South. And I think there were approximately 3,400 people, African Americans, who were lynched because of their race. And it was these newspapers that got the word out. She contributed to the Journal of Negro History, articles published in the Globe, everywhere else. She formed a group that was called the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. She formed a myriad of not-for-profit groups, some of which still exist. She was a part of the Harlem Renaissance. Her publications have actually had a resurgence or a rebirth in recent years. And if you look at them, they're very profound and compelling because part of what they do is they make us look at history through a lens of today. And some of the questions that she was asking in the early 20s are actually questions that we're asking ourselves right now. So I just wanted to provide a little background on who Florida Rough and Ridley is, and to thank yet again the students. I want to thank their parents, and I want to thank the school administrators that made this process work. People say it takes a village. Well, it takes a dedicated village. And, that's what I observed. So I just will end very quickly and say thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for your leadership on this, for your partnership, and for continuing to push us to do such great work. I'm Ben Lovis, I'm the interim superintendent here in Brookline. I'm speaking on behalf of the school committee who are co-petitioners with Deborah Renega on warrant Article 26. I want to talk about the process, this fantastic, open, inclusive process that the community has gone through, not only the Coolidge Corner community, but also Brookline as a whole. I want to start by reading a few things to you about the process that was discussed, debated, and even argued about since shortly after May 2018, when the town meeting approved moving forward the name change by a 90% vote. 90% of the school of town meeting supported going through a process of naming, renaming the school. By September 13th of 2018, so a few months after that town meeting vote, the process the school department and school committee were developing had already been shared at 3 different school committee meetings and had been revised 5 times. This is going back to the year 2018. At the September 13th school committee meeting, the process that was discussed and approved was summarized as follows. There are 6 steps. 1, Coolidge Corner School Community works together to identify the characteristics of a name that will reflect the school community, their school community. 2, significant public outreach so parents, guardians, community members, students, town meeting members, and others understand the naming process and can submit nominations. Nominations will be accepted by online or via paper submission. Number 3, a nominations committee of 12 or more students supported by staff from the Coolidge Corner School and from the superintendent's office will lead a process with the Coolidge Corner School community to narrow down all public nominations to 10 to 15 semifinalists. 4, the student members of the nominations committee and the school committee will hold public meetings and gather input on the semifinalist names before recommending a small number of finalists to the full school committee. 5, the school committee will hold public hearing and consider the finalists before selecting a name to be recommended to the town's naming committee. And finally, the town naming committee holds public hearing to consider school committee recommendations for a school name. The town naming committee approves recommendation, a warrant article will be submitted for a new name in the May 2019 town meeting. Now, I fully understand that we did not hit the May 2019 town meeting date, but I do want to say very loud and very clearly, and you can see it all on our website, it's been there for months and months, that we actually followed every single one of those steps that we laid out very publicly in numerous school committee meetings in September of 2018. And we did that by advertising widely, including hundreds and hundreds of community members, both here in the school, in the community, Coolidge Corner School community, and also townwide. Hundreds of nominations came in through paper and online. Hundreds of community members came to the town naming nights that were led by the Believers in Change and gave us input. The Believers in Change thought carefully about that input, and what they heard mostly in that input, the number one input on that was that the town members wanted the names to be people who were connected to Brookline. And lo and behold, all 4 of the finalists that they recommended to the school committee had strong ties to Brookline. There's some question about whether or not the Believers in Change were convinced or put up to identifying certain types of individuals to be the nominations. Some have called it shocking that students came up with 3 out of 4 finalists who were African American. Some have claimed with no evidence that the students were told through a pressure and identifying people of color or women as finalists. This is some of what the students learned in this process. That 171 town meeting members believed it was right to change the name and move away from a name that honored a former slaveholder. During that deliberations, this is what the town meeting heard and what the students read. The entire process will enable the town to better uphold its stated values by not only removing the name of the slaveholder, but also approving a process and name consistent with our values. Moreover, we can send a message to our students, their parents, and the town's ethnically diverse residents that we are willing to change according to the knowledge we have now. Let us identify the names and values of someone whom all can admire and perhaps even wish to emulate. Finally, let us acknowledge the enormous contributions made by African Americans and other people of color in building this community and this nation. The Believers in Change also learned that all schools in Brookline are named after white people. And of all the ones that are named after people, all of them except for one, the Edith Baker School, are named after women. Sorry, thank you. Big mistake. Wrap up shortly. I'm not sure what's more disappointing, calling into question the work of these students or to call into question open participatory process as a way of stopping the name change moving forward? Or is it more concerning that folks don't believe Brookline students are actually knowledgeable enough and smart enough and skilled enough to learn about our history, recognize the wrong, and seek to openly and actively remedy that wrong? I'm not surprised by the leadership of our students. I am impressed by it, I expect it, and I only ask that we ask more of our students to do the same. And finally, quickly, let me turn to the matter of Florida Ruffin-Ridley. Our response is that it is time to name the school after Florida Ruffin-Ridley. This woman who almost none of us knew existed because her contributions were hidden, forgotten, or even erased from our town's history, stands equal to or above other community members who Brookline has named public buildings for. First of all, she was a teacher. Yes, we want to honor our teachers from today and in the past by naming one of our schools after a teacher. She and her husband were the first African-American homeowners in Brookline, as Deborah said. Who knows what she had to endure to break that barrier? She was an intellectual and an activist, a leader in the anti-lynching and suffrage movement. She was instrumental in bringing the thinking, culture, and arts of the Harlem Renaissance to Boston, and she was a long-time resident of Brookline, living here for 25 years. This accomplished woman raised her family and had roots in Brookline. Florida Ruffin-Ridley made history. It is time for Brookline to make history and name the school in her honor.
I just want to make a public service announcement that there are snacks, pizza, and healthy foods available that have been donated, and they're either out in the cafeteria or in the hall, so that's the public service announcement. Thank you. Mr. Loomis, as you can see, went over 1 or 2 minutes from his time, and we'll allow the petitioners to go 1 or 2 minutes as well over their time. Well, we're going to call on the children now, any children who want to speak, so that I know you've signed up, but it's fine. If the believers in change want to speak, please come up and speak into the microphone.
So if you come up, if you've signed in, just identify who you are. And if you haven't signed up to sign sheet, you guys take the sign sheet in the back. So if you want to sign up, just reach out.
Okay, good evening. My name is Liv Clowder, and I'm a student on the Renaming Committee, also known as the Believers in Change. And I currently attend to CCS as a 5th grader, but was chosen for the committee in 4th grade. Did you know that we started meeting for an hour and a half since December 2018, once a week? And that near the end of our time together last year, we started meeting multiple times a week, not even including the renaming nights, preparing for the public meetings, and presenting to the school committee. We put aside so much of our schedule for the school name. I myself remember the days where I would drop my backpack on the floor and spend hours on the computer, researching, making docs, and perfecting slides, creating scripts, and so much more. We worked so hard because, as students that go to CCS and as kids on the committee, it mattered. I remember learning about the committee, dreaming about being on it, because it's my school name being changed, my school history being made, and I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to be able to have an impact on my school's name, my school's future. At the end of our time together, we chose 4 names, including Florida Ruffin-Ridley. Florida, or Florida, stood out to the committee for many reasons. First, the Believers in Change wanted a name that said the opposite to what Edward Devotion did. Edward Devotion owned a slave and had a slave in his will. He stole that person's life. Since before we know, slaves have been looked over. Even after the Civil War, slaves were slaves. They didn't matter. But now we've decided that those slaves matter. That Edward Devotion slave mattered. That slave's life is worth something. That slave was a something, a someone, and a person, just like you and me. And our committee chose to honor that slave. So that's why Florida Ruffin-Ridley fits that. She collected and preserved Black stories. She was an anti-lynching activist and a women's activist. She also is a great role model for the students of CCS. She follows a motto and shows us that we can have courage, even when you are talked down or underestimated, or when you feel that nobody is like you, because that's what she did. We considered and submitted all the names respectfully and equally. We did not consider the name by gender, by race, or by how many people nominated that name. We considered the name by the person by who they were. Because when you really come down to it, it is who that person was, and more importantly, who that person is going to be as a school name. And to those of you who are rooting for Ethel Weiss, I used to buy lollipops from her store. We considered her, but she just didn't make our final list. So now, I want you to think about how you would feel to put so much time and effort into the school name, just to have it be picked another name and your time gone to waste. I just want to remind you once more of the time, the work, the effort, the heart, the passion we put into the school name, which I want to be named after Florida Ruffin Ridley. Thank you.
My name is Hannah Salini and I'm currently a 7th grader at CCS. I was also a member of the Believers in Change. And to add on to what Liv said, the Believers in Change put a lot of effort and hard work to find a good name for our school. We eventually decided on the Florida Ruffin Ridley. She was an anti-lynching and women's rights activist that we should all look up to. She helped recognize the many contributions of African Americans in Massachusetts. She was a leader heavily involved in political activism and social justice commitment. Florida Ruffin Ridley believed that all races deserved an equal place in their society, and I think that we should honor Florida Ruffin Ridley's hard efforts to make our community a better place by naming the school after her. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily Snyder. I'm in 7th grade, and I was on the Believers in Change. Adding on to what Hannah and Liv said, I think that our school should be named after Florida Ruffin Ridley because she was a really good role model, and we can all learn from her because what she did was working hard, being kind, and helping others. She was also a teacher, so it's a really good way that we're able to honor our teachers. One of our main goals in this process was to bring out someone's story who we didn't really know. And Florida Ruffin Ridley, when I first heard about her, I didn't know anything about her. But I really got to research her, and I was able to learn so much about her and really realize why she was a good choice for our school. I hope you agree.
I'm Heath Colbert Laurie. I am currently in 6th grade. I am one of the Believers in Change. Our process was made very clear to 3rd through 8th grade at the time, 3rd through 8th graders who were involved. We were asked to help the community name the school after the town voted to rename it. The criteria we were given led us to the names of people who provided some restorative justice. Although the 2 other names are good people, in my opinion, they do not, in my opinion, represent choices which would restore lost justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other children in the room? Okay. Abby Cox? Empty Believers. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My mistake. We're gonna let the other petitioners speak. My mistake. Okay. So we're gonna hear now Petitioner Larry Rutman on warrant article 27.
Yes, my name is Larry Rutman. I'm the proponent for Ethel Weiss, whom I knew from the time I was 8 years old in 1939 until the few months before she died in 2015, when she was 101, a period of 76 years. I want to address myself to the children who've just spoken. I've heard a lot about all the work they put in, and they did. And that's a good thing. They were involved in what might be called a civics class. I wrote a letter to myself. I didn't know when I was going to use it, but I'll read it to you because I think it's germane to the issue of the children. I said, should you choose to go in that direction, meaning the direction of Ethel Weiss, I believe you are supporting the young people who worked on this. Why? Because they learned a lot about history and civics, subjects often omitted or not lately accentuated in school curriculum. That only can be good. To participate in a deeply flawed and secretive process in a democratic society now being sorely tested can only be a bad lesson for these students. Part of your turning around on this, I don't know who I was addressing, you haven't made any decision, ladies and gentlemen of the naming committee. I hope you do go in another direction than it seems everybody wants you to go. But part of your turning around, if you do on this, would be to explain, or have explained, to the students how they gained and how they've lost. As I've said publicly, the number of hours they spent is not relevant to the choice. The merit and appropriateness of the choice is of prime relevance, maybe the only relevance. They will have learned that in a democracy, we still have it, we're still trying to keep it, the outcome of an issue is not by fiat, but by open give and take, which has been absent, really, truthfully, from this process. They will have learned about, you guessed it, America. Anyway, I want to introduce somebody now, and that is Paige Scott Reed, who is a devotion mother. 3 kids went to devotion. They lived right in the middle of the area, right close to where I grew up on Gibb Street in Brookline, played stickball, sewer hockey, and all those other sports that we loved at that time. Then went to devotion, Brookline High School and UMass. She lives there with their 3 children, Silas, Jasper, and Etta, all of whom attended devotion school and knew Ethel Weiss. Paige attended Harvard College and Harvard Law School, where she was executive director of the Harvard Law Review. She presently serves as a member of the Harvard Law School Black Alumni Network. Paige is a partner in the well-known Boston firm of Prince Lobel Ty, LLP, where she is an experienced transportation attorney with 20 years of experience in the field. As such, she has risen to have been, not now, but has been, early in her career, general counsel, that means chief counsel, to the Mass Department of Transportation, we all know about them, and the MBTA, we all know about them. Paige, could I ask you to come forward and speak? Paige will speak for some time. I might have a few comments at the end.
7 minutes.
So I want to say thank you. I asked Larry not to give me that introduction. It makes me super uncomfortable, but I appreciate him giving me the opportunity to speak. First, I want to start by saying thank you to some people. I really want to thank the activists who brought this issue forward. Ms. Brown, your work in bringing to the fore Edward Devotion's history was an important part of my children's education here at what I knew as Devo. I love this school. This school has been great for my children. One of the things that's been great for me and them coming here is that they were taught to think hard about what they value, to hold in their head the idea that Edward Devotion served his country, that he cared about education, that he helped to found this school, and that he owned a slave. Hold all of those things together in your head at the same time and try and figure out, how do you deal with someone who loved his country, who loved education, who in some ways was a good person, and also in some ways was not a good person and who owned another human being. That's an important lesson, and the work of the activists brought that to my kids. They would not have been taught that lesson in this school had it not been for their work. They learned a lot through this naming process that also never would have happened without the hard work of the activists in getting Brookline to the point of deciding that we should rename this school. So I have a real sense of indebtedness to that hard work. I also feel indebted to the students who brought to this process what I expect of students who went to the school my children went to. They worked really hard. That's part of what this school taught them to do. They insisted on facts, they did research, and they put their all into it, and they should be proud of that. They were kind. They were respectful of difference in their deliberations. They didn't all agree, and that is an important value that this school teaches. And they wanted to help others. They brought a sense of idealism to the work that they were given. They thought that by doing what they were doing, they would bring about justice, and that's a wonderful thing. With all that said, I still have to speak tonight with a critical voice, and the reason I do that is because this process is so important. It should be a moment when the community is coming together to feel like they are together doing a good thing. This community, the school community, is capable of that. I lived with this community for a long time. My children all went through this school. My children are noticeably brown. They were loved and welcomed. They were given leadership positions. They learned about diversity in the true sense. They had friends who were, had 2 moms, had 4 moms, had a mom and a dad, came from Israel, came from the inner city, came from Brookline and were 3rd or 4th generation white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. And they lived what I think our community can be, a place that values all of those things equally. So this process is super important to me. The process wasn't honest, and I say that not easily, but I think it's true. The community was invited to think hard about what the name should be. That many people came to meetings at this school about the naming of the school, and they put in suggestions, including Ethel Weiss, that were well-meaning suggestions based on who Ethel Weiss was and how she fit with what the school has been teaching children they should be. We have been teaching children that they should work hard, that they should be kind, and that they should try and help others. That's what Ethel Weiss did for this community for a very long period of time. We have been teaching our students that they should look at what society tells them about value and question it. That we have undervalued women, and work that women do has been undervalued. So the work that Ethel Weiss did in running a store and caring for children as they came home after school, that kind of work has been undervalued. We taught them that they should respect difference and they should value people of difference. This is a heavily Jewish community, and the fact of that difference should be a point of pride, not a point of contention. And we taught them that a life given to helping others, even if it's not popular, even if it's not famous, is an important life. So Ethel Weiss stands for those things. My point in saying all of this is not that the school should be the Ethel Weiss School. I didn't put the warrant in. That's not who I am. That's not why I'm here. But the process should have valued the very strong and valuable contribution that people brought to the table by putting forward that suggestion. And I have to say, I don't think the process was respectful of that point of view. I think that has engendered a lot of harm. I think the fact that this process has become as controversial as it is says more about the failings of the process than it does about my community. I know my community is open to change. I know my community is open to restorative justice. I know my community has loved my family being who we are the whole time I've been here. I can show you who my children are as a testament to what they learned at this school. This process didn't live up to those expectations, and that's why I wanted to say something tonight. So, thank you.
one more minute.
I don't know that I can really add much to that. That was so beautifully spoken. And I think that probably you know the position I take on Ethel Weiss because I sent so many papers to you in the last couple of days. The one thing I didn't send to you, I brought to you tonight, were 4 letters that we've received recently. Those letters go to the process, and they also go to Ethel Weiss. And I invite you, before you make your decision, to read those letters because they are so powerful, so moving, and so illustrative of how faulted the process was and how great a person Ethel Weiss was, that I think I think that as sensitive people who are hopefully in touch with the community values we all share, you will be moved to see that you should turn around, as I said at the beginning, and you should vote for Ethel Weiss. Or if you didn't vote for Ethel Weiss, vote for Bob Sperber, because he was a great guy too. I loved him, I wrote about him, and Ethel Weiss was more associated with this school, and I was outraged when I came late to the process and found out that she was not even included in the people to be considered in the final 15, even though she had received more votes than anybody except JFK. The whole thing is outrageous. The whole thing is startling. The whole thing does not remind me of the Brookline I knew when I sat in the town as a town meeting member back in the 60s when I first started practicing law. It's outrageous. This is not Brookline. I ask you to vote tonight to restore balance and equity and correctness to the process so that we can all, I don't know about starting all over again, but it has to go in another direction. It can't continue in this way and give us confidence that we're living in a community that values community values. Thanks very much.
Oh, yeah, we're going to have Joyce Jeswicki is going to speak on behalf of Article 28. As the petitioner's Lee Selwyn is not here this evening, and Joyce will substitute for him.
I'm Joyce Jeswicki, a town meeting member
Joyce,
from
speak into
Precinct.
the microphone, please.
Which one? I'm Joyce Jeswicki, town meeting member for Precinct 9, former school committee member, devotion parent from 1969 to 1991, PTO resident for 50 years. I'm speaking for Lee Selwyn because he could not be here. He's a town meeting member for Precinct 13, and he is the petitioner for the warrant Article 28 to name the school after Robert Sperber. Following the adoption of Article 23 at the 2018 spring town meeting, the school committee initiated a process for selecting a new name for what was then being referred to as the Coolidge Corner School. Nominations were solicited from all public schools of Brookline students, families, and staff, members of the Brookline community, and former students and staff of the Devotion School. A set of 4 specific criteria to consider when nominating a person was provided to those offering nominations. None of these specified any racial or ethnic litmus test. More than 100 nominations were submitted by some 250 people. However, utilizing an entirely different criterion, one that had not been included among those presented to the public as guidelines for their suggestions, and one that had certainly never been specified by town meeting, the school committee's actions throughout the entire renaming process reflected its predisposition to name the school for a person of African American ethnicity. As a result, the vast majority of the names submitted through this putative public nominations process were simply discarded or ignored. The precise process by which this occurred is unclear. On September 11th, 2018, a school committee department document titled Coolidge Corner School Naming Process states that the Coolidge Corner Access and Equity Team will screen all school name submissions before submitting them to the nominations committee. However, in a statement made to the select board on October 7th of this year, Coolidge Corner School Principal Jen Buller, thank you, asserted that the students were given every single name that had been submitted, and there were no weeding out or thinning out of any of them. She also claimed that the students knew how many times each name was nominated and by whom. The students to which Mrs. Buller was referring were the so-called Student Nominations Committee that had been created so that the renaming process could be portrayed as having been student-driven. However, the kids on this committee, some as young as 8 years old, were exposed only to a small group of adults who represented restorative justice as the overarching goal and admonished the students that the name ultimately selected must be of an African American. No opposing views were ever presented to these kids. None of their meetings were open to the public or posted as public meetings on the town's website. Yet the petitioner of our Article 26 stated to the Select Board on October 7th that she had attended all but one of these meetings, a level of access that was unavailable to anyone with opposing views to hers. By the time that any public hearings were eventually held, all but one white name had been eliminated from consideration. And that individual, a personal injury and insurance lawyer who briefly served as a state senator from Brookline, could never come even close to meeting any of the naming committee's criteria. John F. Kennedy, Ethel Weiss, Robert Sperber, and others, all with credentials that easily outstripped those of the one white person that was selected, and all of whom had direct and specific connections to the school, were summarily excluded from the selection process. The naming committee has a long tradition of naming buildings or other facilities in honor of someone who's had a direct and specific connection to that building or facility. Consider some of the names that have been submitted by the public, but were screened out by the school committee process. John F. Kennedy received the highest number of nominations, 33. JFK was born and grew up a few blocks from Devotion School and actually attended the Devotion School through the 3rd grade, as did 2 of his siblings. A clear and direct connection for sure. You've heard from Larry Ruttman about Ethel Weiss and her 7 decades plus connection to the school and its thousands of students. Ethel Weiss received the 2nd largest number of nominations, 20. Robert Sperber served as superintendent of schools in Brookline for 18 years, and during that period was instrumental in working to achieve racial equity and diversity in the Brookline schools, including his leadership in the creation of MEDCO and his work on EDAB aimed at assuring continued financial support for the Brookline school system. All of these people received more nominations than the person selected by the school committee. She received only 2 nominations, and those came from the only 2 petitioners, Deborah Brown and Ann Greenwald. It doesn't take much imagination to see the outsized influence on the kids and on the selection process that has been afforded to these 2 people. None of the 15 names that were actually given serious consideration in this process and became the semifinalists purportedly selected by the students had any direct connection whatsoever to the former Devotion School, or for that matter, to anything having to do with the Brookline Public Schools. None whatsoever. The school committee's the chosen person's sole connection to Brookline is that she lived in the town. But that distinction is shared by several 100,000 others who have lived in Brookline since colonial times. Every other Brookline K-8 school is named after people who gave extensive and long-standing service to the Brookline Public Schools. There can be no justification for abandoning that tradition here. The school committee's racial predisposition had the operative effect of excluding all Jews, all Latinos, all Asians, all people of Irish, Italian, or Greek descent, including Governor Dukakis and other ethnicities. Would you or anyone else have condoned an explicit no Jews, no Latinos, no Asians, etc. policy? Yet the operative effect of the school committee's implicit exclusionary policy has had precisely this same de facto result. At the October 7th Select Board meeting, School Committee member David Perlman advised the Select Board of item 10 in the Naming Committee's general naming procedures. The committee shall not recommend any name changes of any school unless the school committee votes to approve of such change. If this procedure is to be interpreted as an ironclad rule, then it would appear that warrant articles 27 and 28 are moot, and that we are all wasting our time offering our support for them, and that the numerous members of the devotion community who have expressed their opposition to the school committee's selection are simply out of luck. But if that is not the case, the naming committee's action should be to reject the name being supported by the school committee because of the opaque and clearly racially driven process through which it was selected. Lee will be offering amendments to all 3 of these warrant articles, calling for town meeting to refer them to a moderators committee whose task it would be to develop and oversee a truly open and balanced and highly credible public process for the selecting a new name for the school. One that will not summarily exclude the vast majority of the names that had been suggested by the public. A process that will embrace no racial or ethnic predispositions. Adoption by the naming committee of the name being recommended by the school committee would start the town down a slippery slope and establish a dangerous precedent for Brookline that could not easily be reversed going forward. There's simply no urgency in selecting a new name now. As such, the best course for resolving what has become a highly charged and certainly divisive issue would be to address it in a way that will not have the effect of excluding large numbers of the Brookline community from the selection process. Thank you for your consideration.
20 seconds.
He just has a point of information, but please make it quick.
I listened to Joyce's presentation.
Please.
Yeah, no, very carefully. Yeah, Lee, right. And I think Lee made a mistake in one place. I've heard the argument before. He seemed to adopt the view that the naming committee doesn't have the power to do this. But it says very clearly in town meeting added section 68.2, establishing this committee, that you can review all proposals for naming public facilities with the exception of rooms and associated spaces under the jurisdiction of the school committee and library trustees. Now, I've heard the argument before by one of your members, as a matter of fact, repeatedly, that somehow this means that you can't, under your powers, name it. But, it clearly says, it's not the school. The school, you have every right to pick a name for the school. You just don't have the right under this, and whether it's the library or a school, to name rooms and associated spaces, like this room, the gym, the auditorium. But the school, you have perfect power, and don't let anybody tell you you don't. You can call it a legal opinion, but that's what it is.
Thank you, Mr. Rutman. Okay. So from our sign-up sheet, Abby Cox.
Excuse me.
Is she still there?
Yeah.
I'm
offering an amendment to Article 26, so I was wondering.
That's not within our jurisdiction to offer amendments. You can do that at town meeting.
No, it has been submitted to town meeting, it's being considered by advisory. It's on the books as an amendment. So I don't know if that's, I would like to speak. I have to go to another meeting right now.
I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. I'm sorry.
My name is Beth Case. I'm a town meeting member
Hi,
from
Beth.
Precinct 9 and former PTO president of
Beth, we have a long agenda tonight. We're taking public comment now. I don't believe that we have the jurisdiction to entertain amendments to any of this. We're not town meeting. Our charge is to review what we have before us. Thank you. Susan Halford? No, Abby Cox. Is Abby Cox?
Oh, right here.
You want us to move around?
Shall I begin?
Just let me know when to start. Thank you. Thank you. My history with the school at 345 Harvard Street, where we stand right now, is, shall we say, thick. I began at devotion school as a kindergartner in 1974. My classmates and I were bused to our classroom in the basement of a church across from the Pierce School while the Coolidge Corner building underwent renovation. I returned to this new building, well, not this particular new building, but I returned to a new building in 1976, complete with its memorable orange carpeting and wall-less classrooms, and remained through graduation from the 8th grade. 22 years later, I enrolled my son in kindergarten at Devotion, then led by Principal John Dempsey, my former 7th grade social studies teacher. My 2 children did their K-8 years at Devotion, and during that time, I co-chaired the science fair, coached Math League, instituted Devo Can, a food drive for the Brookline Food Pantry, and spent 2 years as the co-chair of the PTO, building community and raising funds for the school. From 2012 to 2015, I served as a member of the Devotion Building Committee, and I believe my name will be on the plaque that goes up in this beautiful new school building. So I'd say I have a large investment in this building and this community. Like many Devotion alumni, I felt some shock and sadness at the original proposal to change the name of the school. It has been a piece of my personal history and identity. However, after that initial emotional reaction, I came to terms. As students of the school, we did not know Edward Devotion's history, but today's students do. 7 years of my career were spent teaching high school history, and I began to imagine what it would be like to have to explain to my students how we could both teach the evil of the American institution of slavery and uphold the choice to maintain the name of someone who held a slave on the building where we support our community's values. I do not believe in whitewashing history, but I also knew from my experience on the building committee that the Edward Devotion House is on the National Register of Historic Buildings, and that the new school had to be designed to accommodate that site. It seems to me that the Devotion House ensures Edward Devotion's history and legacy will not be forgotten, but now we have a tremendous opportunity to highlight other pieces of our town's history. I'm delighted with the Believer in Change's decision to nominate Florida Ruffin Ridley as the person for whom our school should be named. I was not familiar with her story, and that's to my discredit. Ruffin Ridley, an educator, intellectual, and activist in the righteous causes of women's suffrage and anti-lynching, is precisely the kind of person I, as a teacher, would love to hold before my students. The fact that she was actually, I'm going to switch this because we already know this. I'd like to speak for a moment to my friends and neighbors who've taken issue with the process and this nomination. I went to the Devotion School, and I will always identify myself as a Devotion graduate. As I said earlier, it's part of my identity and has its own meaning for me. It seems to me that while a school does belong to the community, the people who wear that name most intimately and permanently are the graduates. The committee's criteria were reasonable, and they listened to when the community said we wanted a name with a Brookline connection. Let's listen to the children who will graduate from this school. Their process was thoughtful, and their choice was deliberate. This is a name they and future generations of students can take pride in. I will do everything I can to support their choice, and I hope you will too. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan Halpert. I'm sorry.
Thank you for holding this meeting and being willing to listen to views other than the prevailing one that the name be changed to honor Ms. Ridley. I am a proud alumna of Devotion School and Brookline High School, and it was hard for me to enter the building tonight and see Coolidge Corner School over the door that I entered. I feel like my history and that of other alumni it just being erased. The views of thousands and thousands of alumni and our history and our connection with the school was never taken into consideration. What about our opinions? This school does belong to the children who are attending it now, and they have spoken eloquently, but not only to them. It belongs to others as well. We're here tonight because the town has voted to rename the school, so I'm not going to debate that. But I do feel that this renaming process has been flawed and frankly biased and not as open as stated. Previous speakers tonight have admitted that the renaming process was about restorative justice. One of the students who spoke even noted that this was his major consideration when it came to how he voted for the renaming of the school. The speakers tonight have stated that they wanted to name the school after an educator, someone with important ties to the school. That person is Ethel Weiss. She had a profound, a positive impact upon thousands and thousands of students. She made such a loving impression upon me. I have a signed poster of Irving's in my kitchen, noting many happy memories. I also have a copy of her rules to live by, which, if you went in there, you could have gotten your own copy. It listed such things as treating people with respect and with kindness. No doubt, Florida Ruffin Ridley was an accomplished woman. But I am opposed to naming this school after her. She has no direct tie to it. I'll say it plainly for all the previously stated reasons that no one is more deserving than Ethel Weiss. I think that this is political correctness run amok. It has been about restorative justice at all costs from the very beginning. If Florida Ruffin Ridley had attended this school or had the business that Ethel Weiss had 2 steps from here, then I would not be making these comments. But I feel that this process has been greatly flawed, and I thank you for having this meeting and listening again to alternative points of view.
Thank you.
Well, I don't think this is political awareness run amok. I think this was a very important activity for the children who were involved and the children around them, because I am sure that what they were doing was seen by all of the children in their class as something very important. What to me is important as a teacher is that children become involved in their education, that they think about what is important in life, when they think about what will bring happiness to people. Now, Ethel Weiss would bring happiness to people, and she was an important woman, but she's not the person these children chose. And I think that I would not in any way change what the children have done. I've heard them speak many times. They are speaking from their heart. They are speaking from their souls. This is an activity that they will remember their entire lives. It is exceedingly meaningful for them to be involved in the decision in the way that they were. No one was pulling the wool over their eyes because they would be smart enough to see that. Children have more understanding and are more aware of what's going on in the world around them than we sometimes realize. I know this from experience. I worked in the Brookline schools for 25 years. I worked in other school systems for another 15 years. I'm an old woman who's been around a long time. And I believe in children and children's ability to make good decisions. And I certainly support this one.
Suzanne, are you going to speak? Okay. Suzanne Schunder?
Hello, everyone in our beautiful Brookline community. Thank you to our committee who's invited us all to be here. My son is on the Believers for Change group, and he worked so hard. If you know anything about 13-year-old boys, you know that there was often a lot of complaining and cajoling that had to happen, and I have soccer, and what about my homework? But he went, and he worked, and he cared about it. Florida, Ruffin Ridley, now I understand is her pronunciation, was not even the person that he most supported and wanted to see win. But he respects the process, and he knows the importance of the input from the community and the values and principles that all the participants followed when they evaluated all the nominations that came in. And I don't know what to tell him when he asks, we children are respecting the process, why can't the adults do it? And I don't know what to tell him when he says, this woman who filled all the requirements that we were seeking on the advice of the town meeting that asked us to do all this hard work, who worked so that those of us who are women would be able to vote, those of the young black men like he is would not end up at the end of a noose, and who was an educator and had ties to Brookline. What person of color is good enough if she's not good enough? And I don't know what to tell him. And I dare say, someone mentioned it, Florida Ruffin Ridley had the business next to the school, we'd be having a different conversation. I do not believe so. If Florida Ruffin Ridley had a business next to the school, she would be even more invisible than she is now, has been for all the decades. She would not even be considered. We're trying to recognize that there are heroes in our Brooklyn community that deserve to have the honor of being the name of the school. And our students work so hard to identify those, and they've come to this enormous contribution that they're giving to all of us.
1 minute.
So, we want someone who had this incredible positive impact. And I have a friend at work whose city in Medford is considering whether they're going to rename a school called Columbus. And when I tell them of the process that the students and the whole community and how many meetings and going to the town hall we went through, she's like, thinks that that's extraordinary. So I would like us to arrive at the right conclusion after all this extraordinary work and the identification of a woman who culminates all the values that we're caring about and live up to the best of what Brookline can be by following through and renaming this school Florida Ruffin Ridley. Thank you for your time.
You still have a lot of names. If any of you can keep your remarks more like to 2 minutes, that would be helpful. And please, if you can avoid repeating what other people have said, that would be helpful too. We have someone named Myers, E.G. Myers.
Hi, my name is E.G. Myers. I live on William Street. My sister moved in to William Street about 30 years ago.
Just speak more into the microphone, or lift it up.
My sister moved up to Brookline 30 years ago, and I visited her here often. And I followed here 14 years ago. We live on Williams, which is kind of right across the street from Devotion, previous Devotion, and also from Mrs. White's candy store. Until hearing about this name change, I always thought Devotion was in regard to some religious connotation, which I had no problem with. And then when I found out it was a family name, I had no problem with that either. And all the time that I've been here, I always knew about Ethel and her store and her work with the school and how she has been a positive person in school, spends so much time with the students, kind of ticks all the boxes that you're looking for in a present day world. Female with issues that are also very important in the present day world, with relevance to exclusion and whatever's happening today. Miss Ridley's work is exceptional and important. She's an important person in history, and everybody should know about her. And I think her relevance and her accomplishments should be taught in schools, along with people like her and all the things that they've done. But I think that Devotion School should be named in honor of Ethel Weiss for all that she did for the community, how she's known in the community contemporarily, and just by all the people in the community. And that's my opinion.
Thank you very much. Erica Anderson.
Thank you. My name is Erica Anderson, and my daughter you heard from earlier, Liv Clowder, who is one of the believers in change. And I want to share with you 3 short stories about her and our family's involvement on the committee that I think should leave you and exemplify why the school should be named after Flavia Ruffin Ridley. First, when my daughter was selected for the committee, she was so excited, and my husband and I looked at each other and we kind of sarcastically laughed and we said, well, welcome to decision by committee, honey. And we all laughed because we're all cynical. And she looked at us and she said, what's so funny, Mom? And I said, oh, you'll get it. You'll see. But the thing is she's getting that last laugh. We are the cynical ones, and I think that we need to remember that we need to choose and respect the hard work, choose the name that these children recommended and respect their hard work and not turn them into cynics. I learned through her what decision by committee can be when there is no one to push an agenda, because an agenda was not pushed here, and there is no one there that is there to force a particular opinion or a particular position that they are taking. These kids researched every single name that was nominated, and they presented and discussed that research to each other. When they discovered, as they researched some of these nominees, that there was almost no information about them, they talked about, why is that? Why is there no information about this person that someone nominated and brought to our attention? They discussed our town and our country's history, both the good and the honorable, and the bad and the dishonorable, and they discussed how they can do better, and they've recommended to us how we can do better as a town. Second, the biggest fight that my daughter and I had last year when she was a 4th grader was when I wouldn't allow her to go to naming committee because I kept her home that day because she wasn't feeling well. And in that huge fight, which I understand, someday I'm going to look back and think I'm lucky that was the worst fight we had that year, I realized how important this was to her. It was important to her because this isn't the stuff of a student steered by administration committee. They weren't brainwashed, they weren't spoon-fed nominees, and they weren't told what outcome to reach. And that's important, not to make people feel guilty, people who don't want to choose Flavia Ruffin Ridley, but why it's important is because that's the only name that wasn't outcome determinative. It's the only name that followed a long process of listening to each other, listening to stories about people who have been too long overlooked, listening to what justice means and how we can restore justice, and listening to the public, even when those comments were not kind, respectful, or considerate of the work they've done. Now it's our turn to listen. The third story was during one of those public naming nights, and a father who's here tonight of one of the other children on the committee looked at me and said, you know, this is what education is about. We should rename the school every single year. And despite all of the negative feedback and how long and tedious this process is, he is right. Because renaming the school is a teachable moment for our students and our kids. Not only my daughter on the committee, but my younger daughter said, Mama, what is lynching? What is suffrage? And we got to talk about those things. We got to have really important discussions that we, as white, privileged people here, aren't forced to have. And that's important that we're having those discussions. We have a debate about race in this town. And that debate is not going to be solved, I'm almost finished. is not going to be solved by naming the school after Clarita Ruffin Ridley, but it is a step in the right direction. And it's time for us to set aside our own personal preferences, our own personal grudges, our personal opinions about how this would have or should have or could have been. And it's time for us to respect the hard work, the vision, and the leadership of our students. That decision and their leadership shouldn't divide us. It should unite us, because it is something to be so proud of. And I promised myself I wasn't going to cry. We should be proud of what those kids did, just like we should be proud of what Clarita Ruffin Ridley did in this town. She is a woman in this town that we should honor, and it's an honor that these students so astutely recognized. And that is why I think we need to name this school Clarita Ruffin Ridley. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading this name. Balazar, and I can't say it. I'm sorry. You're really smart. You must be a doctor.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Erica. I was the person who said, my name is Balaj Salemi.
I'm sorry.
And I was the one who was referred to as the person who said we should rename this school every year. Really, in the bigger picture, how often are schools named after and through participatory democracy in the world? And how often are schools renamed, not only in terms of participatory democracy, but more importantly, participation by 3rd and 8th graders? Most often, of course, we know schools are named after the powerful and the rich, and they're named by people who have political power and political clout. Some have said that the renaming of the school has been a deletion of history. Nothing can be further from the truth. The process of naming the committee was an ideal example of experiential learning for the students and for the community, as well illustrated by that speech at the beginning of the school. The 3rd and 5th graders who participated in this process learned more about the history of Brookline and about social justice than they would have if they had taken the graduate school course. There will always be haters who manipulate words like democracy, who pretend to be standing here as the last defender of democracy in the world. Well, sadly, they did not listen to the children. They are unable to listen because they do not have respect for the young people. What did they fail to hear? Ridley fought and struggled to fight against the greatest injustice in American history, slavery and lynching. She is a hero. Ethel Weiss did nothing for social justice issues in disrespect. She is not a hero. She is not a role model. I don't want my daughter to grow up like Ethel Weiss. I want my daughter to grow up as Miss Ridley.
Woman.
The world is in flames. Only one thing can save us, and that is the young people. Emily, Heath, Hannah lived active citizens, knowledgeable citizens, who work as a group, who are empowered young to change the world for a better place. To have the voice of these visionary young social justice people disrespected in this way is really shameful.
In the spring of 2018, when my youngest was getting ready to graduate and there was a bit of an uproar over a name change, I had a really great conversation with current Coolidge Corner School Vice Principal Saeed Ola. We talked about names, and his words inspired me. He said that institutions should have the courage to examine their names every couple generations. Is the name still relevant? Is the name still honoring the ethos of the community. Otherwise, we become so attached to a name that we forget about the spirit, about the ethos. I'm a former devotion PTO president. I was a member of the building committee that brought you this beautiful place. I'm a current Coolidge Corner School library volunteer, and I have to say last year it was pretty exciting. It was palpable. Every time I came in on Tuesday morning, there were new things. Like, who's going to be, you know, the names that were coming in and stuff. It was a very big community process. But the most important thing about my involvement with the school is that I'm a parent of 3 graduates. As I said, the most recent, 2018. Zane, Pierce, and Miranda all think that, yes, the name should have been changed. They were completely behind that. And I take my cues from them. They're bright young people. They're the future. They are also completely on board with Florida Ruffin Ridley. They think that's a wonderful name. So I am behind that completely. And I honor and respect the young people who did all the work to get to that place. My name's, I put in 2 names and they weren't one of the 16s. I'm okay with that because I know that it was a good process. Let me just say one thing as I leave though. I want to mention my 2 grandmothers. I have a minute? Okay. Give me 1 minute for my grandmothers. Emma and Selina, who were both lovely, educated, wonderful women born in the state of Maine in the 1800s. One couldn't vote until she was 43, and one couldn't vote until she was 38, until women were given the right to vote in this country. It was because of women like Florida Ruffin Ridley, who was a suffragist, that they could eventually vote. And I could vote when I turned 18. I went down to this town hall and I registered to vote when I turned 18. And I don't take that lightly. And I'm very thankful of Florida Ruffin Ridley for working for that, because I'm sure that a century ago that seemed like a very large problem. Thank you.
Ms. Silver, Rachel Silver?
I am a Brookline resident, and I've been a resident practically all my life. And I trust that you haven't already made a decision and aren't biased, and that you listen to me without prejudice. I went to devotion school, my 3 siblings went to devotion school, and my niece went to devotion school. So this school is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, my time learning at devotion school from kindergarten through 8th grade was so special that it led me to become a teacher. And from the names on the list, the person that is most relevant to this school, who had an effect on this school and the students on this school, is Ethel Weiss. Besides having her store, she also came to graduations, and she also donated money towards the school. But changing the name doesn't erase what happened with devotion. And one of the curriculums that I used to use was Facing History and Ourselves. History cannot be erased, but it's important to learn so that we can make positive changes. It's very good that the students have gone through the process. All of this can be a learning experience, what devotion did and didn't do. But to erase is not going to change anything, but to learn from what has happened in history. Holocaust survivors did not erase the branded tattoos of numbers on their arms that dehumanized them. Instead, the numbers stood for for a symbol for the world to see the atrocities and to make this world better and understand people better.
1 minute.
Okay, I just think it's all talking about this name, but wouldn't all the money spent on changing the name be better spent on people who are persecuted today?
Thank you.
I'm usually a pretty articulate person, and I am not articulate this evening. I'm not articulate because I'm scared. And what I'm scared about is actually saying that when we talk about this shouldn't be about race, and this shouldn't be about restorative justice. That's what white people talk about when somebody other than somebody white is being considered. All the schools in this town are named after white people, 8 of them men. And I don't think we were talking about race then and how race shouldn't matter. Race does matter. And we do need somebody who's meaningful in Brookline. But most of the people of color who are meaningful in Brookline have been erased. And that needs to change. So talking about restorative justice is really important. And talking about the importance of race is really important. And it's not being politically correct. It's finally facing up with honesty and integrity what our history is and how we need to tell the stories and honor the people who are honorable and haven't been honored.
Vitaly, that's fine.
Thank you so much for this. It was perfect timing. My son just came to this meeting. And let me start with something. I grew up in the USSR, the country where there was no democracy, where a small minority imposed their views on the majority. I don't like it. Because of this, I never miss elections. I always go to the elections and I watch for good processes. And for me, this process, renaming process, which could have been very good, unfortunately was not that inclusive. That's the main reason why I didn't like the process and the outcome. Not because I don't like Florida Ruffin Ridley, but because I don't like the process. Let me mention a couple of facts about it. Maybe you will agree, maybe you will disagree, but I just wanted to mention them. The decision was made by 13 members of this school plus 2 alums. There are 798 students at this school, at Coolidge Corner School. The kids who made the decision represent less than 2% of the total population. Once again, I told you about my reasoning. I don't like when a minority, only they have a right to speak. And we were, the views of other kids were not accounted for. Alums could not really vote, and all other members of the community were not given a chance to participate, to select people who would go to the semifinalists and finalist lists. The selection of the kids to the nominations committee was a little bit unclear, opaque. There were 34 candidates for 12 spots. There were almost three candidates for each spot. For some reason, the school reopened in a month after the deadline. The school reopened the search for candidates. It was, I know that for many kids who applied, they were searching, why is that? Why were they rejected? And with no explanation why the school decided that, what was wrong with them? That was the question. And the use of a double-blind lottery rather than a regular lottery. When the questions answered by the kids were known, it was also very, raised some questions about opaqueness of the process. When teachers they didn't like the kids, they liked the kids, they didn't like their answers. What was wrong with this? That was a big one. Of course, people talked about the most popular nominations being dropped. People talked about just a small group of petitioners and their allies having access to the committee. So these all are important questions. And for me, the process is very important. Thank you so much.
Suzanne Fetchford, were you going to speak? Not yet. None. Okay. Chuck Swartz.
Hi, I'm Chuck Swartz. I'm a town meeting member, and I'm also a member of the advisory committee. And a lot has been talked about the process, and I still have questions about the process. 2 weeks ago, when these articles were being discussed at the advisory committee, I asked, there were 2 school committee members present. I asked about what happened to all those names, the dozens of names that were originally proposed. How did they get narrowed down to the 15 that were presented to the students? Neither school committee member had an answer. And before I can support a name change, I'd like to have these questions answered, and I'd like for the naming committee to take this into consideration. What was that missing step? What actually happened before the final 15 got to the student committee? So if anybody has that answer, that would be very helpful to me and to the advisory committee. I think the next time we consider these articles. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbie Nibble?
She has the answer.
I'm sorry?
He asked to have the answer, the question answered. And
Okay, why don't you come up and answer the question? Go ahead. Mr. Swartz, we have an answer.
You have an answer.
We researched all the names, and then after we researched them, we came together and thought about each of them, and in the end, we made categories such as did they represent the motto? We pieced together information about them, such as did they maybe donate a somewhat amount of money to something, and things like that. And then once we had come down to figuring out if they fit into some of those categories, there were many more. Those were just a few examples. But after we came down to that, we pretty much just talked over all of them and considered them, and we sort of came down to them, like I said, because some of them, I have to say they were good people, but as a school name, it's different because you can be a good person, but then again, maybe it's different to be a good school name. So we pretty much came down
to who that person is as a school name and how they're going to affect everybody. And like, because you can be like, say, a women's rights activist and then something else. And how will that impact the community? So we sort of came down, that was like one of the biggest criterias, is not like exactly who they were, but who they were going to be. Because as I just said, it's not who they were, because it's one thing to be a good person, it's another thing to be a school name.
Thank you.
I
think we're going to avoid them.
I just wanted to know, it was mentioned that they narrowed down the list.
Yes.
Was this from the whole list that you were presented with at the beginning?
You looked at the whole list. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
believe it or change, no
Okay,
one,
we're
no
not
one
gonna-
narrowed down a list for them. They took all 119 nominations and dealt with all of them.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. Bobby Mabel? Okay.
Bobby, you want to say something? You good?
We'll see.
You need to say something.
I'm Bobby Mabel, town meeting member from Precinct 10, and a member of the advisory committee. We often name public buildings and spaces after those whose heroism, service, integrity, or contributions to society we wish to recognize. And sometimes a significant gift of money or land is the sole reason for the naming of a building or public space. But over the decades or centuries, the values of our society change, and we realize that the standards acceptable in the past conflict with our present goal of creating a society in which all of us are granted equal ownership and respect. The renaming of the Devotion School is because the town of Brookline decided that forcing students, black and white, to spend 9 years in a school named after a slaveholder does not reflect the town's values. Although there are individual blacks who are recognized in our school curriculum as leaders in the fight for the end of inequality, many people know only those who were part of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. For that reason, I'm speaking in favor of naming the Coolidge Corner School after Florida Ridley, a black woman born in 1861, before slavery was ended. For part of her life, she lived in Brookline and taught in a Boston school. Her children attended Brookline schools. In addition, she spent much of her working life attempting to bring about change. As part of the National Association of Colored Women, she demonstrated for voting rights for women in 1896, saying, "Our women's movement is a women's movement in that it is led and directed by women, for the good of women and men, for the benefit of all humanity, which is more than any one branch or section of it." This is how Florida Ridley once defined the goals she worked toward in the organizations of which she was a part. All we ask for is justice, not mercy or palliation. Simple justice. Surely that is not too much for loyal citizens of a free country to demand. Naming the Coolidge Corner School after Florida Ridley provides an example for all our students. Because of her, black students can see themselves in the history of Brookline. And for all students who may doubt their ability to bring about change in the world, she is an example of someone who took individual responsibility for working to make things better.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your time and service. My name is Lauren Bernard. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 8. I am also the parent of a 5th grader at this school, and I direct one of the after-school programs at this school called DASA. So I had some remarks prepared, but again, I don't want to repeat what many other people have said. I'm speaking in support of the name change to Florida Ruffin Ridley. And I think you've heard dozens and dozens of reasons why. I'd like to put this thought out there. I'm also a historian by training, and I'm not a historian because there are no jobs for historians, but one of the things you learn in the practice of history is that one of the noblest things history can do is to elevate an unknown person who made a contribution. And I find the work that the students did a perfect example of the practice of really terrific and well done history, and I salute you for that. One of the things when you write a dissertation they hammer into you is this has to be original scholarship, something no one else has talked about, no one else has done. And it's really rare to be able to produce something that authentic and to, again, elevate a person who has done remarkable things to a place. So a lot has been spoken about the process by which students came to this name, but I've heard very, very little about the process by which we came to the names of Ethel Weiss and Dr. Robert Sperber. I mean, where was, honestly, to the petitioners of these articles, where was your process? Where was your open process? Where were your community meetings? I wasn't invited to any of them. There were over 15 for this, and even though you weren't invited to the enclave where the students were, hammering out some difficult issues as young people, I think I participated in a number of processes in this town, and those of you who are town meeting members have heard from me quite a bit about processes that I don't like, and this is about the best process I've seen. So I'm not really sure where all of the consternation is, but I would love to hear at some point what your process was, sir, and what Mr. Lee Selwyn's process was, because I haven't seen much of any. In conclusion, I'd like the committee to consider one other fact is, by not naming the school for the choice that the students worked so hard to come up with, what kind of message does that send to our students, to our kids, to future students, to future kids? And in the words of my son, who some of you know has a lot to say, he said, "Mom, it sounds to me in that case like the adults don't want the kids to learn. Do we want to impart that message?" Thank you.
Marvelous. I should know that.
Hello, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Hadassah. I'm a town meeting member in this precinct, and a butter living about 70 feet away from the entrance of the school, and most important, a parent to a 5th grader here. So on November 9th, 2016, my then 7-year-old daughter was crying hysterically over the presidential election. And she asked me 2 questions. 1, why do people hate women so much? And 2, what are we going to do to fight Trump? Which is why I became a town meeting member. Fast forward to May 2018, and I was speaking to the petitioners about the name change and about what my daughter was thinking. And they invited her to come speak to town meeting. And she did, as apparently the youngest person ever speaking at town meeting at age 9. And she said that she was concerned about the name change. She liked devotion. This is a wonderful place to learn and to be and to grow. But she also understood the reasons why, and she knew slavery was wrong. And she had 3 requests in her speech. 1 was that the kids would be allowed to process all the feelings around this. 2, what was the second one? 2, to learn more about why we had to change the name to incorporate it more into the curriculum. And third, and I quote, I don't want a bunch of random grown-ups to come into my school and tell me, hey, now it's named after the Swedish chef. Goodbye. So clearly we're not talking about the Swedish chef, but we are talking about random grown-ups coming in and telling students this is what the name of your school is going to be, despite all of the wonderful, hard, impressive work that they have done. So fast forward to just this week, and my now 10-year-old talked about how in her class, in social studies, they had a poll about whether we should consider Columbus Day versus Indigenous Peoples Day. And she said no one chose Columbus Day, even the teacher who was Italian. All of the students realized that it has to be Indigenous Peoples Day. And why? Because as she said, quote, I'm tired of learning only about the bad things that white people do. There's more to history. It should be herstory. Please, naming committee, vote for the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. If you don't, you are going to be disappointing many children who have faith in the process in town government, who feel like they've been heard, and who feel like there's more to herstory than just white men doing badly. Thank you.
Ooh, that was good.
Hello, my name is Beth Stram. I am a parent of 3 students at this school, 3rd grade, 6th grade, and 8th grade. Some of you also might know me as a former school committee member. I stepped off of the school committee 1.5 years ago. I am here tonight because this dialogue around the name and the process has raised a number of questions for me that I've spent a great deal of time reflecting on, so I first will ask and encourage you to consider reflecting on them as well. As you know, the reason for removing the devotion name was because he owned a slave. We've been talking about that. And what I have been wondering is, why would it be wrong for students to consider what action steps might begin to offer reparations to the harm caused by that namesake as one of several lenses they applied to the name choice? What would they have learned from this process had they not been asked to consider that lens? Several of you have also raised the question, which I have been wondering as well, is what will the students learn from this process if they are told that they have a voice in the name selection and the adults with the authority in this town disregard that voice? For me, what current and future students learn from this name change about civic engagement and about the present day significance of our country's racial history is by far the most important outcome of this process. That learning has the potential to make a deeper and more lasting impact on our community than any name choice ever will. And I do support the name of Florida Ruffin Ridley. It is an honorable name. Please listen to the students and support naming the Ridley School. Thank you.
I'm just going to make this brief because most of the points I wanted to make were made. But I just want to reiterate what Beth said and what many people said here, that this has been a process that is being changed at the end. And I think it's important to reflect how, well, sorry, I didn't make good notes, so I'm a little scattered trying to make it short. But I think I'm just going to go to say that at the advisory committee meeting that was held a few weeks ago, they asked the impact that this name would have down the road. My children are in 2nd and 4th grade. They are too young to have known any of the people that were suggested. And so this has been a process for them of not emotional connection to anybody, but just a pure learning process. They have learned from their friends. They have come with me to meetings. They have just accepted that this is a change that needs to happen. And they are going to be impacted by the process, by the learning, and by the honoring of somebody who deserves to be recognized, who was not recognized for many years. And I think that is very significant. I'm not speaking as eloquently as some others here, but the last thing that I want to point out is that I think people get caught up in saying that they didn't like the process, but maybe didn't realize for whatever reason that the process was very open and happening, and they just weren't aware of it until the end. I have been to meetings at Town Hall, I've been meetings here, and honestly, I find it a little shameful that one of the largest outcomes comes after a decision has been made and people aren't happy with it, and then they come. And I think that, to me, is one of the biggest things that we need to decide how all of us are going to talk to our children at the end of this to say how we deal with that decision. And I urge you to recommend Florida definitely. Thank you.
Okay, Suzanne, do you wish to speak? Yes. At the end of public comment. Oh, I remember. Oh, okay. Okay, we thought you were. You'll get to speak. No, I misunderstood. I thought.
Yeah, I would leave.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm Suzanne Ferrisfield. I am on the school committee, and I have been a part of this process as it has developed. So a lot has been said already that I wanted to say, but I do have some other things, so I'll just try to do something a little different if I can. I do want to talk about the process for a bit. We very deliberately on the school committee were given the charge to come up with a name or to recommend a name to the naming committee. And so we took that charge very seriously. We had lots of discussions about that. And really with the encouragement of then Superintendent Bott, we decided that it would be best if the students of the Coolidge Corner School, in fact, had a good amount in that process, and that they would, in fact, come up with recommendations. And so that is the process that we put in place, knowing that we wanted community input all the way through that. And so we did that. We set up a lottery system. There was an application system. The students applied. We asked for additional applications, so we had a good pool, just as you do when you're always looking for candidates. We went through a lottery system, and that is how we selected the students to be on the committee, and we got a good representation. We wanted to make sure we had representation in diversity, race, gender, age, level, and participation, and we got that, and it was a good group. And under the leadership of Principal Bueller and Vice Principal, and kind of thoughts around that, they actually did the work. So I want to just read quickly, if I could, some of the names of the training sessions the students went through, because this was not go in a room and just pick a name. So they, in fact, were given lots of training around what it means to be a group, what it means to come up and be a participant in decision making, and that was really important. So here are a few of those. So they started off on December 5th, presentation by the petitioners. So the petitioners were there that first meeting to let the students know what the petition was and the history behind it and why this was important to the town of Brookline and why this work is important. So they did that. December 12th, there was the Hidden Brookline walking tour that they took with Barbara Brown. It's wonderful if you have a chance. If you haven't done it yet, I really highly recommend it. December 19th, they had a team building and group decision making. January 9th, what is it like to have difficult conversations? And January 16th, the launch. And all during that time, we were sharing information with the community. We had community outreach going on, and we were soliciting nominations. To the gentleman over here, I think perhaps he was talking at the advisory meeting. I did not give you full details because I was not at the meetings, so I actually didn't know fully how the students picked the window, got the names down to those 4 or 5. But I want you to know that we were getting updates all along, there were community updates all along, and we had community input and hearings all along. So we did have a full process, both with the school and the students, and we did have it with the community. I've not heard the process for the other 2 nominations, and that is concerning. I think that does send a message both to our community and to the students that it's okay to come in at the last minute and perhaps not go through a process that we deemed was so important. So I urge you, please, to consider Florida Ruffin Ridley. That is what we have recommended, and we are delighted that the children have come up with a name that is so strong and one that we can be so proud of. Thank you.
George Seswicki, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. First of all, the number of children who worked terribly hard, plus the 2 petitioners, represent fewer people than the top nominees received. That was basically the only open part of this whole process was when they asked for nominees. Only one person tonight has denigrated another one of the nominees to name the school, which was very sad, and I'm sorry he wasn't cut off when he did that. My children, 4 biological children, and the child I took from a horrible situation, went to devotion and went out in the world having learned some important things. And they voiced this when they were in their university. They weren't taught what to think. They weren't even taught how to think. They were taught to do their research, to come to conclusions, to question. Not to do it because some teacher said, this is what I want you to do. Not to do it because some parents said, this is the way you have to do it. So from the public input, you have 2 more nominees, people who have chosen to put them on the warrant article. That's from the public, not from 24 people. So renaming the school, that ship has sailed, right? You weren't at any of those meetings. I wasn't at any of the children's meetings. We know who was at those meetings, so don't tell me the process was good.
John Buller. Thank you.
That is
Hi, my name is Jen Buller. I'm the principal of the Coolidge Corner School who was at all of those meetings. So I'm hoping to shed a little bit of light and some clarity on what happened during that time. Recently, I was quoted in the Patch as being a snack provider to the children, which I found incredibly comical. But it's pretty true. Like, that was my role, was to make sure they were fed and doing what the school committee had tasked them to do. One of the most awe-inspiring moments of the whole process was when they were looking at the 119 names. And they had the debate about JFK. And so many of them are so connected to JFK because they all study. They are the only school in Brookline that studies JFK in the 3rd grade and the history of who he was and how he was connected to our town. They all go through that in the 3rd grade. And they really felt passionate about JFK. And there was a student in the naming group who said, "That's great, there are so many buildings named after JFK. Our job is to find a story and raise somebody up whose story we do not know." And so they weighed all of that. Florida Ruffin Ridley couldn't possibly have had the number of nominations that JFK does, because nobody knows who she is. And that was part of the process, right? To raise her story. Another thing that was incredibly awe-inspiring was listening to the students debate each name and talk through the importance of each of the names and what kids would learn from them and what questions kids would have about when they walked in the door of the school. Who is this person? What did this person do for our town? How are they connected? What can I learn from them? How can I be inspired by this person? Just like Liv talked about. It wasn't so much what their accomplishments were, but what was this person going to teach us and who are they going to inspire us all to be? So I urge you, it was maybe not the most perfect process. This is the first time that the town has gone through something like this, but it was a good process. They weighed every single name equally and fairly. They had open comments. They read all 250 pieces of public feedback that adults gave them in kind and not so kind ways during all of the open meetings that they had. They listened very carefully and took the 15 semifinalists and brought it down to 4 people who were connected to Brookline. And that is what the public tasked them to do. And I would also caution us to be careful about the words that we use when we're describing the public. The public include our children. And so to say that the public is putting forward 2 other warrant articles doesn't count the children who are also part of our public who are putting forward in a co-petition with the school committee the warrant article about Florida Rough and Ridley. So as a principal of a school, I'm worried about what I'm going to have to teach the 920, not 700, there's 920 kids at this school. What is the message that I'm going to have to teach them about the town government and the adults in this town and what they think about student voice and their importance in the larger discourse of this community if we do not support the process that they went to. So I urge you to listen to our students and please consider the name Florida Rough and Ridley. Thank you.
Just identify.
Sure. Hi, I'm Abby Erdman. I've taught here in Brookline for 45 years. I did not go to the school. I want to put a slightly different angle on this, which is we've heard how incredible the kids are. We see how great the principal is. We know how awesome Florida is. What is Brookline? Where is Brookline at this moment? What is the Brookline that we want to stand for? I'm working for an organization called Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity. Where is that Brookline? I've been witnessing Brookline for 45 years. Brookline is so often on the verge of doing right and manages to do wrong. This is one of those moments. This is a moment we will not forget. Brookline, if you overturn this name, where the process has been democratic, where the outcome is democratic, where the children have learned about education, what are you saying to the world about Brookline? If Bob Sperber were here, he would be moaning. He believed that Brookline was a lighthouse. Come on, Brookline. We can be a lighthouse tonight. Please vote with the committee. Vote for Florida. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment.
Can I say something? I didn't know whether it was a sign-up sheet.
Sorry, Larry, we're not taking...
Well, a lot has been said.
Larry, we're still in public comment. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, but I would like 2 minutes to just answer some of the
No,
stuff
let's
that's been
not
said.
defend it. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Arthur Conquest, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. I moved to Brookline 1982. Had 2 children go through the public schools. I'm going to make this short and sweet. 8 of you up there, if you go against these children, okay, it's wrong. I voted for Roland Hayes in the balloting. All right, and I'm upset that Roland Hayes was not chosen. This is the children's choices, or choice. All right, they have spoken. There are going to be other schools that'll be named at some point down the road, or other rooms, or other auditoriums. Let's just show these children that we respect them, we respect what they've done, we respect democracy, okay? And we really honor them as being part of this process. And that's, where we should land up, with the children. It's an education for them, and we honor their choice. Thank you.
Anybody else who wanted to speak in public comment who wasn't spoken? Thank you. And thank you all. We're going to move into the meeting section of our meeting. Is everyone still here? Can I get the microphone down?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So for anyone who wasn't here at the very beginning, just to be clear, and we just spent the past over 2 hours listening to some really important and respectful and impassioned testimony. We heard from all 3 petitioners. We heard from, I don't even know how many people, well, many. And it was extremely enlightening for me. I'm sure it was for the rest of the community. At this point, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a discussion and take 3 votes on each whether to recommend warrant article 26, 27, 28. We're going to take each vote separately. I propose to my committee that we entertain a motion starting with warrant article 26, which is the joint school committee and Deborah Brown and a few others warrant article, that we entertain a motion to recommend that article, and somebody second the motion, and then we'll have a discussion before a vote, and we'll do the same format for each of the other articles. So I'll entertain a motion on warrant article 26, one way or the other.
I move warrant article 26.
Okay, second?
Second.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to open up discussion of committee members. We've heard a lot tonight, and I don't know about to begin. We don't have to have a discussion, but I think we will. And if anyone wants the microphone, you can take it. Go ahead, Mary.
Was adding up between kindergarten and grade 12. I went to 8 different schools, and only 2 were named after people. The rest were geographic names. And I'm beginning to think that was a good idea. And especially when I look at some of the names of the Brookline schools. I have absolutely no idea who Michael Driscoll was. I don't know anything much except he was on the school committee about Mr. Runkle. I have no idea who Pierce was, man, woman, boy, girl, anything about him or her. The only one I seem to know much about is Lincoln, and that's actually William Lincoln, not Abraham, the way most people think. The 2 schools that I went to that were named after people, one of them was named after Abraham Lincoln. However, Brookline seems to want to go the other way and name it after a person. Or at least we'll have that choice at town meeting, although as you may have heard earlier, Beth Cates, I believe, has proposed a warrant article that says keep it the Coolidge Corner School for a period of time. I may end up supporting that. I really think that if a couple of years ago, if the devotion community, past and present, had been polled on changing the name of Edward Devotion, it'd still be Edward Devotion. And I think if the devotion community, present and past, were polled today, frankly, I think it would be Ethel Weiss. I have a real problem with the process of what was done here. I think at best it was flawed. I think you can honor and respect the work the kids did and still disagree with their choice. And I do disagree with their choice. Nothing wrong with Clarita Ruffin Ridley, but I think the person ought to have some connection to the school. And the person who has the most connection to the school, I believe, is Ethel Weiss. And so I think that's the way I'm going to go. I would make one more comment, which is the people who attack the process or who criticize the process of the Sperber and the Weiss warrant articles. If anybody in the room was under the apprehension or misapprehension that once the kids had chosen a name, that was it, then they did not understand the process. This was always going to go to town meeting. This was always going to be a decision of town meeting. Town meeting could choose how much or how little respect to give to the process that the schools went through. But it was a town meeting choice. And if you know how Brookline's government works, you also know that if you can get 10 names on a petition, then you can put an article before town meeting, including one that says, name it the Ethel Weiss, name it the Bob Sperber, name it whomever. So I think it's a little unfair to say, what was your process? Your process was you collected 10 names per the way the town government works, and you decided to offer town meeting another choice. I think town meeting is going to give a great deal of credence and a great deal of weight to what the kids have done and what the school committee has approved. But I don't think that's any reason to criticize other people putting forth their ideas.
It doesn't go, yeah. It doesn't go well.
David Perlman on the school committee. I want to dovetail off of the remarks that Mr. Friedman just made. I agree with him in the sense that, of course, the process is very clearly delineated, where if you get 10 signatures, you can propose a name. And I don't believe that those who asked about the process of warrant articles 27 and 28 were questioning the legality behind bringing forth different proposals. I certainly don't do that. I welcome as much input from anyone in the community. I think where the criticism, if it's to be called that, comes in, is this notion that the school committee's process was somehow deeply flawed, when there actually was a very clear long-term process behind it. So it's not that we question the rights of Mr. Ruttman and Mr. Selwyn to bring forth their warrant articles. They have every right to do so. But for others to be focusing all this energy on the alleged lack of process that the children took seems to be misguided given all the public meetings, given all of the explanations we've heard tonight about how much thought went into it, about how much independence was involved among the children and how they winnowed down the field of names to their final choices. We heard very directly from one of the children who was involved in that process. We also heard from the principal who was in the room during these discussions. And she explained how all 119 unique entries were discussed, including John Kennedy, and why they decided to go in another direction. So this process, no process is going to be perfect, but this was definitely much more of a process than the other warrant articles had, which again is not to say that those petitioners do not have a right to bring them forth. I would also add, we have a lot about democracy. Part of democracy is the freedom of assembly, and the freedom of assembly has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to also mean freedom of association. There was nothing that blocked any other constituency in this town from putting together their own process. I am up here with representatives of various other boards, including Parks and Recreation Commission. Had they so had anyone in town gotten the 10 names and chosen to undertake some different process with some other very particularized criteria, that would have been fine. And then town meeting ultimately would decide which criteria they liked better or which name they liked better. And town meeting is still free to do that now, and they will do that. Also, for those who feel that they have lacked input throughout the school committee's process, this event tonight is an example of democracy. We're hearing from people of different opinions. Mr. Rutman has come to some school committee meetings where he expressed his support for Ethel Weiss, and we welcomed that. And perhaps he'll be coming tomorrow, and he's welcome tomorrow as well. Part of democracy is also listening to those with whom you disagree. We've done that throughout with the school committee. So I do want to push back on this notion that the school committee process has been terribly flawed and not hearing from other members of the community, or that somehow other groups and constituencies and interests are precluded from putting together their own processes, because they had every opportunity to do so. They've known since last May of 2018 that there was going to be a renaming, and they could have put together whatever process they so chose. For that reason, I'm very comfortable in supporting Florida Ruffin Ridley as the next name for this building. And I'll also add that I say that as a devotion alum. I graduated from here in 1996, and I'm very comfortable that the children made a very thoughtful selection.
Anybody else down there want to speak?
Yeah.
Malcolm, do you
I
mind?
don't think I need the microphone. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
So there's really two very prominent things that are in my mind in this moment and listening to the debates and the presentations. The first is really around this idea of advantage. And I want to put this in a way that I think is troubling for me to hear in what was to my alma mater, and my brothers and my sisters and my daughters. When, in our history, that all of a sudden, black women become the most advantageous. Whether you are referring to the petitioner as if she has some mystical ability to draw these children, out of peril, or if you're referring to Florida Ruffin Ridley as if she had an advantage over white people in Brookline. That is so far beyond anything I can grasp, particularly knowing how hard my parents, who had to fight legal battles to actually live here. In the meaning of what it meant to go to Irving's, but more importantly for me, Mrs. Abrams, the Jewish realtor, who finally actually would help my parents get housing. But it was very clear that Mrs. Abrams had power, that my parents, and particularly my mother and father, did not. And I'm struggling to understand why that is a complicated lesson. The last thing that is really prominent is this idea of erasing history. I too went here, and unlike what I hear a lot of stories, my parents actually had told us about Edward Devotion and slavery. We made official visits to the Devotion House and were never told about that. And I think you have to think really long and hard when you say which history is erased. Perhaps a school that had been in existence for over 120 years, it did not think it meaningful to teach its students that the name of the school, which was not actually to be named after him, Every devotion donated money to build a school in the center of town. Not this school, not the one I went to, not the one that my parents worked hard to move to Babcock Street to do, for me to go to. Perhaps we aren't erasing history by changing the name. The history had been erased for over 120 years. Perhaps you need to look at the history that you just did not get over that time. Instead of thinking all of a sudden, we are yanking, and this is like some teachable moment. White folks in Brookline had over 120 years to have a teachable moment. And as far as it goes for Florida Ruff and Ridley, the last thing I looked at, she was a teacher. There are no African American teachers in Brookline Public Schools when Florida Ruff and Ridley is living here. And she reminds me of my grandfather, who graduated from Michigan with what would be President Gerald Ford. He graduated from University of Michigan in education, went back to his hometown in Peoria, Illinois, and was told colored folks aren't allowed to teach white folks. And that could probably be your answer. You can shake your head and think no, but that's because you want to believe something in Brookline that just isn't true. Did my parents have to fight to live here in 1973? Do you really want to believe the same school district allowed black teachers in the early 1900s? And then tell me my duty is erasing your history? I suggest you vote for Florida referendum.
Can you hear me without the microphone?
Yes.
I'm one of the original members of the naming committee and have been through this process, certainly not for school, but for other buildings and townwide facilities. And having been around when the procedures and the criteria of the naming committee were developed, it was the practice of the original group of people on the committee to basically approach this in a fairly simple way. And that was to take whatever proposal was before us and to apply the criteria that are included in our procedures, and I'll read them to you. Before making a recommendation on a proposal for the naming or renaming of a public facility, the committee will take into consideration the following naming criteria. A person or organization of excellent reputation and character, who or which has set an example of outstanding citizenship and or has made an exemplary contribution of time, service, or resources to or on behalf of the community. B, a national noteworthy public figure or official. C, an event of historical or cultural significance. Or D, a significant donation or bequest, establishment of a trust, or other similar action. So when I look at the proposals under Article 26, Article 27, Article 28, and you're free to accuse me of being overly simplistic here, I believe that each individual meets at least one of these criteria. And as Ms. Kaplan pointed out just before the meeting started, further in the general naming committee procedures, there is a provision that says any applicant who is an employee of the town must have had at least 25 years employment and must wait 2 years from the time an application is received to have the naming committee recommend the public facility in his or her honor. As somebody's pointed out, Dr. Sperber worked here for 18 years. And I think if we're going to take these procedures seriously, that would disqualify him from consideration because he didn't work here 25 years or longer. So again, having given considerable thought to this since the articles first came before the advisory committee well over a week ago, I've concluded that both Florida Ruff and Ridley and Ethel Weiss meet criterion A, and I would recommend to town meeting that both those names be considered by town meeting.
Anybody else like to speak? Yeah. So, thank you, everybody. Everybody. Fantastic community participation tonight, and fantastic leadership from the principal and the former superintendent, the interim superintendent, and the school committee members who persisted and persisted and persisted with this process, which I occasionally sat in on. And if you think this meeting is long, you should go to school committee. So the naming committee criterion includes things about the Parks and Rec Commission has to approve if you want to name a field or a bench or something, and the Department of Veterans Services needs to approve the recommendation or recommend something for a veteran in the town. And under the bylaw says that the naming committee shall not recommend any name changes of any school unless the school committee votes to approve of such change. That's number 10. So the only of the proposed 26, 27, and 28 we have had approval from the school committee is indeed the recommendation of the school committee, which is a co-petitioner on Florida Ruffin Ridley. So on similar criteria to Carla's evaluation, though I don't necessarily think I would agree with your conclusions, this is the only name that school committee has put forward after their serious consideration and their empowerment of the children to go through a process that had additional criteria added to it by the school committee, because it's time to include considerations of representation and equity and restorative justice in the town of Brookline. And we have heard from educators, former school committee members, and parents about how much they admire the process that the students went through. And I too tremendously admire what the families and the students, the commitment that they've shown. And it's finally great to hear a very clear articulation of what the process was. And I thank the principal for staying all those nights, all those snacks, but most important, for being captured on tape describing what the process was that you designed to educate the children. And it was Suzanne Federspiel, the current school committee member, who went through some of the titles of the lessons, the focus of each of their sessions, and I had some clue about those, to talk to people about what it is to have difficult conversations and to make difficult decisions. What it is to do group process. These children were given an opportunity to learn things we all probably should go to school to relearn now and again. How to engage respectfully when we don't necessarily see eye to eye with people. So I think we can only make a recommendation tonight on Article 26 because only the school committee has provided this as an approved meeting. And what we say is only advisory. Town meeting will do what town meeting will do. But I would like to move in accordance with what the school committee, the students, and the co-petitioners of the original unnamed devotion school recommend for Rita Ruffin Ridley.
Could you read
Do I understand you to say, do I understand you and Carla to say that we're ruling out Square and we're ruling out everybody, and then only the school committee? Is that the my
Mr. Redmond, this is our meeting now, and
for God's sake,
this is our
Joe.
meeting. This is our meeting. Who else? Would anyone else on the committee like to make a statement? Dan.
I hope you can hear me.
Would you like to come here?
Give him the microphone.
Give him the
mic.
I'm fine.
Give him the mic.
Can you hear me? I'll try to be brief. I applaud. I'm not against the process at all. I think that it was fair. I think it was equitable. There may have been flaws, and perhaps those flaws can be addressed at a later time. But I came here tonight, and my initial inclination was to favor Ethel Weiss because of her connection to the school. However, I applaud these children and their parents and the people who guided them through the process to come up with Florida Ruffin Ridley as their choice. I think that if we carried this process out for months and months and months going forward, that I don't think we could come up with 3 better names than the chosen as finalists. I think Dr. Sperber has been honored in this town, and perhaps he's eliminated because of one of the things that Carla mentioned. But I agree with Carla that either Florida Ruffin Ridley or Ethel Weiss should be the choice. And at this point, I will decide how I will vote when the time comes. But I think the process was fair, and I applaud the children, and I applaud the people who guided them through the process.
Okay, so I'm just going to thank you, members of the committee, for your input. I just want to make a few comments of my own. I, like a couple of other people on this committee, am a graduate of this school, and I actually couldn't feel prouder of what I've heard about the process, even though I agree it was maybe not a perfect process, and as some of you may have heard the old axiom, the perfect is the enemy of the good. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect process. There's no such thing as a perfect anything. And I think this was an amazing process, even if it was flawed. Think about the fact too that it was a unique experience. This renaming a school was a unique experience for this town. It is a unique experience to come up with a process that honored so many different voices and had community input, had children's input, is really something that if you take 2 steps back from it, I think it was quite amazing. To be perfectly honest with you, I have to say that when I first heard that children as young as 3rd graders were going to be involved, I had a little bit of skepticism, I have to be honest. I knew it was 3rd through 8th. But when I went to one of the renaming nights and spent time with those children, some of whom were the 3rd graders, and 3rd through 8th, working together, with whom I spoke, I just had absolutely no doubt from that point on that this was just an amazing educational activity, not just activity, it was a unique opportunity for the children of this community to actually experience history and civic engagement in the most relevant way you can ever imagine. And so I just think what happened in this town, notwithstanding maybe some imperfections here and there, was really quite extraordinary. There's a couple of other things I feel like I've learned just listening to some of you tonight. This whole notion of the difference between a JFK and a Florida Ruffin Ridley, the fact that what the kids chose to do in this process is to elevate people who are unknown but who have made significant contributions. I really haven't focused on that quite as much as I have listening to some of that tonight, and I think that's also really extraordinary. I also submitted a nomination that wasn't selected. I went before a school committee and advocated for one of the 4 finalists who wasn't selected. I think it's important, and I couldn't be more thrilled with this selection tonight, assuming that that's the recommendation. Another thing I just want to remind people is that this was a joint adult-child project. At the end of the day, there were 4 names submitted to the school committee, and it was the adults in the school committee who selected that final name. So it really was a partnership. And it was a partnership because of the school committee's involvement and the school department in putting the whole process together in the first place. I am going to vote in favor of Ms. Ridley. I also just want to say one more time that, and I thank Joanna for raising this, our school committee guidelines, not school committee, sorry, it's from another era. The naming committee guidelines do specifically say that our committee shall not recommend any name changes of any school unless the school committee votes to approve of such change. Now, I'm not saying that my fellow members here tonight can't vote affirmatively on the other articles. That's up to you. This is what it says. I think some of these issues will come up again in town meeting. And the point that I made earlier about the 25-year rule for town employment is also kind of black and white in our guidelines also, but I think some of these things can always be subject to interpretation. So if somebody chooses to approve the selection of Dr. Sperber, that's something that I'm sure this issue will come up again in town meeting. So we, just to remind everybody procedurally, we had we're going to take a vote now on Article 26, and more on Article 26, and I'll just read, I'll read what we're going to vote on. And again, we're voting on recommending this to town meeting. It's not a final decision until town meeting decides. So right now, the naming committee is going to take a vote on the recommendation in favor of Article 26 to see if the town will vote to name the PK through 8 school located at 345 Harvard Street, Brookline, Mass, the Florida Ruffin Ridley School, effective September 1st, 2020, or act on anything relatively thereto. Okay, all those in favor of of recommending Article 26 to town meeting, please raise your hand. Do you have that? Okay, all those opposed to recommending Article 26? Were there any abstentions? So what was, no abstentions? Yeah. Okay. Now, so the vote is what? Okay, 6 in favor to recommend, 1 opposed, and no abstentions. Now we're going to take a vote on, if someone could move voting to recommend Article 27, and I'll just read the article again. Okay, second? Okay. To see if the town will change the name of the Coolidge Corner School, formerly known as the Edward Devotion School, to the Ethel Weiss School, or to act on anything related thereto, as town meeting shall decide. All those in favor of Article 27, recommending Article 27?
May I ask a question?
Oh, sure. Yes, actually, we can have a discussion. I'm sorry?
26. Are we allowed to vote in the affirmative on other articles as
Yes,
well?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
All those in, any other discussion or questions? Okay. All those in favor of recommending Article 27 to town meeting, please raise your hand. 3. All those opposed? 4. Okay. So that motion fails. And finally, would somebody move 3 in favor, 4 opposed? Finally, could somebody move that we take a vote on recommending Article 28, which recommends the Robert Sperber School? Okay. Any discussion of Article 28? Malcolm?
I'd just like to point that no one at the public hearing tonight actually spoke in favor of Robert Sperber. No, the petitioner spoke for. Someone spoke for the petitioner. No one who actually went to speak in public comment.
Okay.
Spoke in favor of Robert Sperber.
So noted. Thank you. Any other comments or discussion? Okay, all those in favor of recommending Article 28 to town meeting, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Any abstentions? Did you say that? 0 in favor? 5 opposed and 2 abstentions. Okay. So that concludes our meeting and our hearing, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for your participation, and have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow.